This is going to be me reading 23 part 2. Pilate was instructed to remain where he was until Caligula and Agrippa had conducted the Samaritan delegation out of the palace. The tribune offered his sympathies and excused himself. Pilate slumped into a couch and propped his chin on his left hand. The gold ring which had conferred friend of Caesar status on him cut into his jaw. He pulled it off his finger and flung it out a window toward the forum below. Perhaps he should have been thinking of how best to break the news to Procula. He might have considered some kind of final appeal to the mercies of Caligula. Conceivably, he could have philosophized on the fragile bubble of contrarieties, which is human existence. Or he might simply have succumbed to despair. Strangely, Pilate himself thought he did none of these things. He merely reflected on Agrippa's last remark to him and about the event it conjured up. Had he never condemned an innocent man? So this is how the prophet Jesus must have felt. No. Pilate had made a solid defense. Jesus had not. But no matter, they were both condemned. Where was justice? What is truth? Caligula, Agrippa, and Macro returned, the last carefully closing the door behind them, so that only the four of them were now in the colonnaded hall. Well now, Pilate, the emperor smiled, don't look so crestfallen. Our little pantomime is over. No, you're not going into exile. We won't take a solitary sestere from your treasures. Aha, you stare at me? Certainly. I would too under the circumstances. He nudged Agrippa and Macro, both of whom were quaking with laughter at what they all found a tremendous joke. I suppose we do owe you an explanation, Pilate, Caligula continued in what he knew was a diabolical understatement. Tomorrow, the four Samaritans are leaving for Puteoli, well satisfied that they've succeeded in their mission of vengeance against you. It was a long trip for them, so the least we could do for appearance's sake was to give you a severe sentence. This way I'll be very popular with my new subjects in Samaria, even if regrettably it was at your expense. I must confess, Prefect, if I'd have been at that mountain and faced that rebel army, I'd have taken the same measures. I doubt it, Agrippa smiled. You'd have executed a good deal more than 14. Caligula let out a roar of laughter, nodding his head and slapping Agrippa's back. Then he looked at Pilate and said, There, man, I do believe you're shedding a tear. Put your emotions in order, Prefect. Though it must be quite an ordeal to pass from the horror of threatened death to the ignominy of exile to full acquittal, all within a quarter of an hour. But Excellency, said Pilate with mounting elation, what about Thallus? He's not returning to Samaria. Oh, he's party to the plot. Well, he deplores your bloodshed. He's glad you killed the false prophet. Of course, you can't return to Palestine or become famous in Rome for that matter. That would ruin it all. Aha, certainly you didn't hope to be reinstated as prefect of Judea? Oh, no, Princeps. Quite on the contrary. 10 years is enough for anyone there. The Princeps nodded, and if the Samaritans should ever learn that you're still at large here in Rome, we'll claim that you were recalled from exile for good behavior or some such excuse. Anyway, by that time, their tempers will have cooled too. Join us for lunch, Pilate. It was a simple luncheon on the Palatine. Its sybaritic luxury, I don't know what that word means, its luxury was limited to a mere 8 courses and only 4 changes of wine. All the while, it seemed, the thin lips of Caligula, sticky with an exquisite vintage, were drawn into the same inscrutable smile. Between one of the middle courses, he emitted a long belch. Then, like there was nothing that had happened, he asked, Did you and Procula enjoy your trip up the Nile? Ha! And I can also tell you the exact length of your aqueduct from the Judean hills into Jerusalem, the number of pillars in your Tiberium and Caesarea. Caligula continued to supply other minute details from Pilate's administration in Judea, which of course astounded him. Now, how could I possibly know these items? The Princeps inquired, indulging in his favorite game, playing with people. Do you really know who my friend is, Agrippa? Do you really know who my friend Agrippa is, Pilate? Not a descendant of the great Marcus Agrippa. No, but named in his honor, Agrippa smiled. My full name is Julius Herod Agrippa. Oh, the grandson of Herod the Great? The brother of Herodias, wife of Antipas? The same. So that's who Agrippa is. He is the grandson of Herod the Great. I've certainly heard of you, but I don't believe we'd ever met in Palestine. No, Agrippa said. I've been in Rome much of the time. For all his 47 years, Agrippa was still ruggedly handsome, more so, Pilate thought, than his painted sister Herodias was beautiful. Agrippa's life story thus far makes the wanderings of Ulysses seem positively boring by comparison, Caligula interjected. He was brought up at the court of Tiberius as companion to his son Drusus, the one Sejanus poisoned. Then he sailed to Palestine. I still think it was to escape your creditors, Agrippa. There he got so depressed at leaving Mother Rome that he contemplated suicide, but his dear sister Herodias invited him to Galilee, where she got him some small government job to tide him over. What was it again, Agrippa? Agronomus, superintendent of the market at Tiberias. Yeah, but you know those Herodians, they never get along. Once he and Herod Antipas got drunk at a banquet and started trading exquisite insults, so naturally Agrippa had to leave Galilee. Now, Pomponius Flaccus had just arrived as our new governor in Syria, and would you believe it, Flaccus turned out to be Agrippa's old comrade from Rome. So it was up to Antioch for our wandering friend here. But alas, the people of Damascus hired him to lobby in their behalf with Flaccus, who took that unkindly. So once again, Agrippa played bankrupt vagabond. But knowing that only Rome could have proven his fate, he borrowed more money and sailed back to Italy. When he landed, my grandfather, Tiberius, first had him pay off old debts in Rome. Then he welcomed back to court life on Capri, where he spent the last year tutoring me. Agrippa is now my closest friend. And do you know who loaned him the funds to pay off his debt? Our rich friend and sage whom you just met, the Samaritan Thallus. Amazing tale, said Pilate. Oh, but it's not finished yet, said Caligula. I almost lost my Agrippa. In one false move, he nearly ruined the game. One day he and I were out driving on Capri, and thinking no one could hear us, he said, "You know, Gaius, I wish to God Tiberius would soon go off the stage and leave the government to you. You're so much more worthy of it." I smiled, but thank Jupiter I said nothing, because the chariot driver overheard us. Damnable Eutychus, Agrippa muttered. Well, he told Tiberius about the comet one afternoon when he was being carried around his hippodrome in a litter. Grandfather pointed to Agrippa in a rage and told Macro, "Arrest that man." Macro, who hadn't heard the charge, was bewildered, not knowing whom to arrest. When the litter rounded the track a second time, Grandfather was nettled to see Agrippa still standing there. "Him, Macro, seize him." He said, "Whom?" asked Macro. "Agrippa, you dunce." "So long since 6 months in prison, Gaius," Agrippa commented. But the worst of it was not knowing it would be just 6 months until Tiberius died. For a while, I think he had in mind to have me pitched off the cliffs of Capri. Well, why not? You'd committed maestas, you know. But then came the great day at Misenum. Macro told me you were there, Pilate. Yes, Princess. I wanted him to arrange my hearing before Tiberius. I had no idea. Yes, well, do you know what I did after Grandfather died? Caligula asked. You released Agrippa? Pilate humored. Not just released him, I welcomed him into the palace with open arms. I had his shaggy hair cut and presented him with a new wardrobe. Far more than dear friend, smiled Agrippa. In a symbolism which must have drawn tears from the gods, you presented me with a chain of gold equal in size to the iron fetters which had bound me in prison, and then you put a diadem on my head. Pilate was becoming ill at the touching affection, but he dared do nothing more than smile agreeably. The power which the mature Agrippa exercised over the impressionable young emperor was ominous. You realize the significance of the diadem, Pilate, asked Caligula. The symbol of royalty? Exactly. I have the honor to present to you Herod Agrippa I, the new king of Galantis, Trachonitis, and Batanea. Philip's former tetrarchy? I thought it was now part of Syria. Was, Pilate. My heartiest congratulations, King Agrippa. Agrippa nodded briefly. Yes, Caligula added, and we may well increase the territory. Rome has tried prefects in Judea without a great deal of success. It may take a Jew, or a part Jew like Agrippa, to govern a nation of Jews. At any rate, if our prefect, Marullus, doesn't work out, Agrippa will succeed him also in Judea. The last time that province was well governed was under his grandfather, Herod the Great. Pilate swallowed the insult. He had no choice, and then he shifted the conversation. Marullus is replacing Vitellius's man Marcellus, he asked. Yes, of course. Vitellius has tried to endear himself to the Jews by a whole series of changes, but I'm not sure of them. You know that he dismissed your friend Joseph Caiaphas from the high priesthood. It was news to Pilate. What about Vitellius's war in Antipas's behalf against King Aretas, he asked. That stopped the moment I acceded to the Principate. Antipas is now Agrippa's rival in Palestine. I don't want Roman legions used to support the competitor of my closest friend. A gratifying morsel of information, thought Pilate. By now they had finished lunch. Pilate was about to excuse himself from the palace when Caligula asked point blank, "Tell me, Pilate, do you think you have any future in Roman government? How and where would you like to serve the empire next?" I'm at your disposal, of course, Princeps, but I'd like to take an extended vacation before assuming any new post. I think you should. How old a man are you? Almost 50. You might consider retirement then. No, I really don't think Rome can use your services in the future, Pilate. Certainly did nothing worthy of exile or death, but Agrippa has given me a full report of your decade in Judea. There were many instances of tactlessness. Forethought, diplomacy, sensitivity, and skill were missing on numerous occasions. Of course, some things you did very well. Taxes were collected regularly. You kept the peace. Caesarea was well administered. The Tiberium, the aqueduct, and other constructions were well conceived. But you failed in other matters. The standards in the Shields affairs were silly. Perhaps Sallust was right about the Samaritans being pacified without bloodshed. Possibly such frictions were unavoidable and you couldn't help it. You're not a Jew. We Romans do have that handicap, and you did govern us as well. I suppose as any of your prefects so far, that much should be said. Pilate cast a not-so-friendly glance at Agrippa, and Caligula caught it. No, Pilate, don't think unkindly of Agrippa as some kind of spy who observed you the whole time. He admitted to me that he reflected the Jewish viewpoint in commenting on your administration. He also spoke in your behalf after the hearing this morning. They reached the door of the palace. Caligula extended his hand and said, "So, Pontius Pilate, your career for the state is concluded. Rome thanks you, and you'll receive the usual government pension, of course." Pilate was trying to make as graceful an exit as possible under the circumstance when he saw Agrippa whisper something to Caligula. The emperor nodded his head. "It's time for the baths," said Agrippa. "Might I accompany you, Pilate?" The very last thing Pilate wanted to do that afternoon was visit the baths with Herod Agrippa, but a king had made the request, and he was in no position to refuse. And that's part 2 of chapter 23.